Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was really a very good detailed explanation. So, before I ask like the more grand questions about self-determination theory, I just want to know if you can comment on the controversy between autonomy being a need or not. Like, what's the evidence and contrary of that?
Yeah, so the hardest thing about being in this area is that everyone gets, people define autonomy differently. And in fact, I did I thought some of my best work in the 1990s, where I tried to distinguish between two historical notions of autonomy. Uh, in the 1950s and 60s, personality researchers, they defined autonomy in terms of being independent
Mm-hmm.
and not allowing anyone else to influence you. So autonomy, it was almost, the 50s and 60s, they were afraid of communism and they were afraid of groupthink. And uh, it was critically important that you not be influenced by others, but that you just figured out what you cared about on your own. I actually call this reactive autonomy. It's all about resisting influence. And that's not actually the way autonomy is defined in self-determination theory. Instead, self-determination thinks about autonomy as volition, as endorsement, and it doesn't care whether you are influenced by others or not. What matters is whether you're the one who feels like you're choosing. And of course, children, teenagers, even adults, it often makes sense to gather information, to listen to other people's opinions, and to then work through a process, a reflective process of, okay, this is what I'm going to believe, this is what I'm going to pursue, instead of just because someone suggests something saying, oh no, I can't do that now if they tell me that that's what I should do. So I distinguish between reactive and reflective autonomy. And if you think back to the pandemic, it was just astonishing to me that when vaccines were finally developed and made available at record time, it was like a scientific uh, breakthrough that there were effective vaccines developed within a year of the breakout
Less actually. It
of
was like 9 months.
9 months. Yeah. And I got mine. I went to uh, the Palais de Congrès. They had a walk-in clinic. I got mine in late December in the same year. And I was so happy to get my vaccine. And but 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 a large minority of maybe 30, 40% uh, didn't want to take the vaccine, felt like they were being forced to take the vaccine, and resented that they were they would have to take the vaccine. It was really funny because during the pandemic, I watched the movie Contagion, which was made 10 years before the pandemic. And it was quite a horror thriller. It was very accurate. It predicted what would happen. But the one thing it did not predict is that in that movie, when they had the vaccine, that was the end of the drama. That was the end of the story because everyone took the vaccine. And that's how you take care of a pandemic. But in our world, because some people don't trust science, and because some people have this notion that my autonomy means that only I decide. And you had a lot of people saying, I'm doing my own research about this vaccine. And none of those people are capable of doing research on vaccines. They can't do randomized controlled studies. They can't they can't separate out the active components of genes, and but they think that going on YouTube and listening to people who tell them that the vaccines are going to make you so that you can't have an erection, or that it's going to make it so you can't have children, that counts as research. So uh, I think uh, the lack of trust in the scientific process, the lack of trust in government authorities, the lack of trust in the fact that all of these medications, all of these vaccines, even though they were developed quickly, they were administered to billions of people. And the effectiveness of the vaccines, were confirmed. Uh, so, uh, yeah, so I think autonomy is a tough one. And I personally think that one of the problems we have is that people don't understand that autonomy is actually collaborative and reflective, and that you're most autonomous when you're open to others around you. You're open to inputs from other people. You value guidance, advice. You can challenge it, of course, but challenge it from a position of knowledge, or find people of knowledge in a particular area. And, you know, I don't know what happened during the pandemic. It's really discouraging.
Yeah, I think what you're tapping into is that autonomy is a form of pro-social independence, not independence, but individuality. Whereas the radical independence that you described is very isolating, and it's very like hostile and reactive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
And there's a lot
autonomy,
of anger. And
yeah.
and yeah. And the classic, we have this in our lives. So uh when my daughter was, they say there's the terrible twos. I actually found it starts a little bit after a one, where the kid wants to do the opposite of what you say. They want to exert their will. And with teenagers, often it's like, if my parents say this, I'm not going to do that. Uh, but what you don't realize is, if you do the opposite, or if you choose to not do anything that your parents say, you're actually not behaving in a volitional way, because
Mhm.
you're well, sometimes we do the opposite of what the parents say, but even if we just restrict, so if your parents suggest like certain careers for you, and you say, okay, fuck that, if they're going to suggest, I'm not doing anything they suggest, or, well, I was thinking of it, but now that you say it, I'm not going to do it. That's just restricting
Yeah.
your freedom of your degrees of freedom.
Hmm.
And uh, the other thing that Rich Ryan says is that, humans, we evolved to live in small groups. That's how we survived. That's how we gained skills. That's how we improved as groups and cultures. And dependency is part of human existence. We
Well,
are
it's a necessary
totally
part. Yeah.
dependent. Yeah, yeah. But dependency doesn't mean that you can't have autonomy. You can
Right.
have, when we fall in love, when we have friends, there's an understanding that we depend on each other, but we still have the opportunity to, like, voice our our beliefs about things, and to negotiate. But to view any kind of reliance and dependency as a sign of uh, a lack of individuality or weakness, that just doesn't apply to the way humans are designed to function.
Right. It's tough because I think the concept of individuality is heavily, like it's interpreted and disseminated in a very political and historical and even legal sense, whereas the one
Yeah,
you're talking about is a very psychological and qualitative sense. So
I
the
think that's good. I
interpretations
like how you
are,
put it.
yeah. So the
Yeah,
interpretations are kind of like the categories are starting to become like kind of like not like they're mutually distinct to a certain extent, right? Because if you've
Yeah,
only known the word independence from like that perspective, and you've never taken like the psychological information about it, it's hard to understand how those two can actually blend in, and the
yeah, yeah,
differences become more like vast. Exactly. So
yeah. And I'll sum it up by saying we can listen to other people and still be fully autonomous.
absolutely.
And if we refuse to listen to other people, you can't be fully autonomous. If you feel like it's up to you to decide everything and you're not going to take any inputs, that's not autonomy. That's like covering your ears and eyes and being like a willful 2-year-old.
Yeah, I mean that could also like border onto psychopathy if that becomes too much. So
Well, that's an
it's
interesting point too.
yeah.